Hello, everyone. We're going to talk about accommodations and modifications in the IEP today. So, the objectives for this training will be just a short overview about what an IEP is, and then how accommodations and modifications fit into the IEP, and then how can you help your students succeed through having accommodations or modifications in their educational background. So the definition of an IEP, it identifies your child's strengths and interest preferences, and also if they need strategies to help them lead to improved educational outcomes. The IEP is based on the assessment of the student's present levels of achievement and functional performance. It's a legal document and it's covered by the educational law known as Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, to enable that your student is involved in making progress in the general education curriculum. So the present levels of performance, this is a part of the IEP that's very important for students. I was a teacher for almost 30 years, and we always tried to write these as if they were right now, and of course, what is happening to the student at the present time or the present level. And they reflect the strengths and the unique learning characteristics of every student. It's very individualized, just like the IEP. They are the foundation for building the IEP as well, and they create a clear picture of where the student is now and what kind of goals should be prepared for a student and be developed in their academic and functional performance. Also, you can have current evaluations that address academic, behavioral, social, or emotional needs of every student. So a little bit about goals in the IEP. There are academic goals. These can be, written language or math, maybe behavior, problem solving skills, things like that. There are also functional goals, which are life skills, impulse control, processing speed, motor skills, and things like that. There's also a set of behavioral goals, if necessary, that also teach self-management, maybe relationship skills like social skills that the student needs to learn. And then what does responsible decision making look like? Those are the kind of things that are written into the goals. So when you talk about goals, they should be SMART goals, which SMART stands for specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timed. So specific, it just names the skill or subject area that needs to be targeted and what results you're expecting from that. The measurable, this is where you use maybe standardized testing or grade level curriculum, also measurements that are made by the teacher. Attainable is just the realistic progress for the child. So if they're at a certain grade level, you expect them to maybe gain a year's worth of learning in 1 year. But for some students, that's not realistic or attainable. So the next one is realistic. It is how clear your child is on accomplishing the goals that have been set forth for them. And then timed includes a time frame in which the child will achieve the goal that has been put into their IEP. So I have an example here. So within 1 year, and when given fifth grade reading material, Maria will read 120 words per minute with 2 to 3 errors, measured using a data collection form and monitored by the special education reading teacher. So that used all the SMART criteria: specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timed. So how, excuse me, accommodations and modifications fit into this? They're designed to help a student access their educational environment and curriculum so they can benefit most from their education. They have to be individualized to each of the student's needs, and the IEP team determines with the parent the accommodations and modifications for students based on the needs that are identified through the IEP, an evaluation, or the teacher team documentation. And how you can request for accommodations and modifications. You can communicate your concerns in writing, which is always best, because if it didn't happen and it's not written down, a lot of times we always jokingly say it didn't happen, but that's just the way it is. So we would have those in writing. You're getting support documentation. from the school or from outside providers, and then the use of an evaluation, and then, of course, your IEP or 504 plan if you can get it. Also, call a meeting of the IEP team or the 504 team to review and consider new accommodations and modifications. What would that look like for each student? What do you think works for the student? And how those should be accomplished. Also, keep in mind accommodations and modifications are based on documented need in the area of deficit. So accommodations. A lot of people have a hard time with these. When I first started teaching and was working in special education, I was like, well, that sounds like kind of the same thing, but they're two separate things. So accommodations are, it changes how a student learns and not what the student learns. So there's four main types of these, and we're going to go into these a little bit in each one. Presentation, response, setting, and timing, and they must be connected to an identified need. So the presentation accommodation. This is a change in the way instruction and information is presented. So, you have audiobooks now. So students can listen to the audiobook instead of reading it. When I was teaching, I would read to the students, let's say, and ask them questions about it and things like that instead of them reading to themselves and then answering the questions. So here are just a few accommodations that you can look for your student. Maybe digital media works best for your student instead of reading, or maybe having fewer items on a page to read, materials that have a larger print, and then have another student share their notes that they took from class, and maybe having a written list of instructions or pictures for the student to follow. The next one is a response accommodation, and this is a change in the way a student completes assignments or tests. So like we were discussing, if I had a student read the material and then answer the questions, that's one way of doing it. But another way would be to answer questions that I ask them instead of writing. There are many different kinds of accommodations, as you can see from our lists, from the presentation one and the response as well. So some would include maybe having giving a worksheet or a pen and paper task instead of using a computer if that's hard for the student. Or maybe they use a computer instead of a pen and paper task. Maybe they use a graphic organizer, or maybe extended due dates would help the student with their response. There are many ways to do this. So the next one is setting accommodation. And this is changing the environment that the student works in. So some students, let's say that you're going to go and take a test, and the students might need to have a quiet classroom or in a small group. Would work better than sitting in their regular classroom with the whole group. And then they don't feel like, oh my gosh, I have to hurry up and get this done because everybody else is done and waiting on me. So I also had students that needed to sit near me. Or I would go check in with them and just walk by quietly and ask them how they're doing and what is going on, if they needed any help. Also, maybe they have a lot of sensory issues, and the visual stimuli on the wall is way too much for some people, and so you would lessen that. Also, a lot of things, I feel like this helps me too, to have a fidget or a special kind of cushion that kind of keeps you weighted and makes you feel like that you're ready to learn. The next one is the timing, and this changes how much time a student needs to complete each task or be allowed to take breaks. So maybe the students have an extra time to complete a task or assignment. So some other ones could be that they have frequent breaks. I had a student that when he felt overwhelmed, he was allowed to leave the classroom. He would go walk around a little bit, come back, and then would continue with his work. Or one that felt like they needed to have time to move from one transition to another transition in a task, and we would give them extra time that they needed to do this. So it's just how the student completes their work in a timed or not timed way that helps them. So some other accommodations I wanted to talk to you about. Organization skills. So some of these might be using a highlighter or having a check in with the sponsor teacher on their progress. Hey, how's it going? What's it look like to you? And you can come in and talk to me if you're having issues. And then maybe just some reminders about what your assignment is, how are you doing on your assignment, and letting them know that they can come to you at any time with questions. Another one is personal care accommodations. Some people might need support with their eating or taking medication at a certain time of day or assisting in their dressing needs and things like this. So there are many accommodations that you can think of. So a modification is a change in what the student learns. So accommodations, remember, were just a change in how they did their work or learned something. A modification is changing what they learn. So this is changes in the curriculum for the student who are maybe farther behind than their peers. And students are not expected to cover the same material at the same time as their peers. So some of the curriculum modifications could look like learning different material. So you might have them working, the example here is working on multiplication while the classmates move on to fractions. So that is how the student could be learning something different but still be in the same classroom. Or getting graded using a different rubric or a standard than maybe the classmates. Or maybe they have a hands-on project and the other students are doing maybe a presentation or something like that. So it's just changing the expectations or guidelines for projects would be another modification. So there are assignment modifications as well. And maybe it's completing fewer homework problems. Maybe the teacher had given the students all 20 math problems, and the student needs a modification to have only 10 problems, or to write a 3-paragraph essay instead of a 5-paragraph essay, things like that. So this is just the chart about accommodations versus modifications. And remember, accommodations are how a student learns, and modifications are what the student learns. So just a few of the examples here is preferential seating for how the student learns, or accommodations using computers, things like that. And the modifications would be modifying workloads, maybe an alternative book, or assignments. So how this works in secondary education, keep in mind that there are no IEPs in secondary education, but you can make sure that your student self-advocates for what accommodations and modifications they might need when they are going to school. So when I first went to college, I didn't think I needed this. And so I went on to college and then I started failing miserably because I have dyslexia and I didn't ask for help. Then I went to the Disability Services Department, talked to them about the modifications and accommodations I had in school, and they really did help me. So you need to really promote that with your child if they're going to be going into secondary education, because the schools are very willing to work with you, and the professors and everybody really are helpful with this. So thinking about your child's needs, as a parent, you're an expert on your child, so keep that in mind. And then you may want to consider, what needs does your child have at home? Are there accommodations or modifications that you do at home? What are some of those things? You could share that with your IEP team. What is your child communicating with you? What do they need? Most people can tell you what they do need and what works for them. And then what are the accommodations or modifications your child currently have on their IP? Or maybe last year, what did that look like? Was that something that you could use in the next grade? Or maybe you're moving from middle school to high school. How could that be different, or how could it be the same? And also, if you could just think about other ideas that might help your student. So there's also special considerations for accommodations and modifications. This is on the IEP. They would ask you about special factors. Let's say that there's a visual impairment. Does the child need Braille, or is there a special communication that your child needs? Do they have a hearing impairment, or are they limited on English proficiency? So how could you have an accommodation or modification dealing with these? Also, assistive technology, amazing stuff we've come up with in a very short period of time, I feel like, in assistive technology. I remember when you had the really, really earliest parts of having, things read to you. Now it's great. Back then it was kind of a pain, but now it's wonderful. So does that work for your child? Is that something that they could use as an accommodation? Then you talk to your team about the assistive technology that works for them. Same with behaviors. Does your child have a behavior that gets in the way of their learning? And these will be addressed in the discipline section of the IEP, and you might want to do a behavior assessment for your child and see if there's behavior interventions that they could do or modifications, just tweak it a little bit. Does your child have a problem or behavior problem at lunchtime? Well, how could we deal with that? Nothing really needs to be done except maybe making sure that, his teacher understands that, you need to give him a break right after lunch or something like that for an accommodation. If you need any support, we have family specialists who do one-on-one supports. So if you would call us, and our number is right here, 505-247-0192, or you can email us, or you can do a web intake, and we'd be glad to help you and talk to you more about accommodations and modifications that might work for your students. Thank you so much, and have a great day.